Somewhere in the Indonesian archipelago, on an island older than its own myths, a discovery was waiting. Flores, a crescent of volcanic rock and green jungle rimmed by bright blue ocean. Locals here had always spoken of the Ebu Gogo, small, mysterious people who once wandered these hills. Scientists dismissed these as folklore. They would not dismiss them for long. It is the year 2003. A research team arrives by boat, unloading crates and equipment onto a rocky cove beneath towering limestone cliffs. The air smells of salt and wet earth. Somewhere above them, hidden in that cliff face, is a cave called Liang Bua. They make camp at the base of the ridge, setting up tents and equipment in the fading afternoon light. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The path to the cave winds through scrub and native palms. The entrance yawns open like a dark wound in the limestone, massive, shadowed, and ancient. Inside, the team moves carefully, headlamp beams cutting through floating dust in long, pale cones. Their footsteps echo. Their voices drop to whispers. They have come here looking for evidence of how early humans crossed ocean gaps. What they are about to find will change everything. In October 2003, Australian archaeologist Michael Morwood crouches into a narrow, shadowed pocket in the cave wall. His gloved fingers brush lightly across compacted sediment. And then, bone. A fragment, half buried, pale against the dark earth. He lifts it slowly toward the light. Behind him, a colleague steps forward with another lamp. For a moment, neither man speaks. The find explodes into something none of them expected. Carefully, methodically, the team begins to expose what lies beneath. A grid is laid out. Stakes are placed. Brushes move in slow, deliberate strokes. What emerges is a nearly complete skeleton. A tiny adult female, later cataloged as LB1. Her skull is no larger than a grapefruit. Her entire body stood under 1 meter tall. Scattered nearby are stone tools and the butchered bones of animals. Someone, something, had lived here. The team huddles over field notes, sketching and debating by lamplight. Day turns to night, and night turns to day again and again as the excavation deepens. A time-lapse of that labor would show the cave floor slowly giving up its secrets. More bones, more tools, more evidence accumulating layer by layer. At the end of one long day, someone lifts the tiny skull toward the dying light at the cave entrance. Its small, rounded cranium sits silhouetted against a cobalt sky. A single star has appeared. No one says a word. In 2004, the team publishes their conclusions. This is a new species, Homo floresiensis, a branch of the human family tree that survived into the late Pleistocene, shaped by the forces of island dwarfism into something startlingly small and startlingly ancient. The headlines erupt. The world calls her the Hobbit. But science is never just science. Outside a press conference, reporters cluster around a photograph of the tiny skull propped on an easel. Microphones jostle for position. A national flag snaps in the wind. And the questions being shouted are not all about evolution. They are about ownership, about control, about who gets to speak for the bones found in Indonesian soil. Newspapers stack up with competing headlines. Pathology versus new species. Modern human with a disorder versus ancient relative. Skeptics, some of them respected anatomists, point to LB1's small brain as evidence of microcephaly or Down syndrome. A televised debate pits rival camps of scientists against each other on a studio stage. Arms folded, voices clipped. The controversy is live and loud and deeply human. Then comes the intervention that will define the controversy for years. Tuku Jacob, one of Indonesia's most influential paleoanthropologists, removes the Flores bones from the National Repository. He takes them to his lab in Jakarta. Standing before cameras in a crisp batik shirt, he declares after a brief inspection that LB1 is pathological, not a new species at all. Crates arrive at the repository under security supervision. Forms are signed. Doors close. The international team is furious. Access to the specimens is restricted. Accusations fly that delicate bones have been damaged, that the fossils are being held hostage, that a political agenda is overriding the science. Jacob denies all of it. In the press, it reads like conspiracy. But the reality, as always, is more complicated. Indonesian scientists had watched foreign-led teams publish sensational claims from their country's ancient earth and felt sidelined from their own heritage. Jacob was not simply obstructing. He was insisting that Indonesia's voice could not be ignored. It was a collision of motives and miscommunications, of nationalist pride and academic territory, played out in the most human way possible. And the vacuum it created was filled immediately by speculation, amplified by media, and weaponized by anyone with a theory to sell. Science, though, has slow and stubborn remedies. Researchers who had been allowed to photograph and measure the bones before the controversy deepened went back to their data. A conservator's gloved hands, working under a magnifying lamp, had already captured images of LB1's wrist bones, shoulder joints, and jaw. What those images revealed could not be explained away. The morphology was primitive, not in the way that disease distorts a body, but in the way that deep evolutionary time shapes one. These were archaic features, inconsistent with any modern human pathology, but entirely consistent with an older branch of the genus Homo. CT scans were run. Three-dimensional renders rotated slowly on laboratory monitors. Comparative anatomy charts spread across conference tables showed LB1's bones placed beside modern human specimens and earlier Homo fossils. The differences were stark and systematic. Team after team of anatomists ran their own analyses, and the conclusions kept pointing the same direction. Then, at a separate site nearby, the case became even stronger. Excavations at Mata Menga, just a short distance from Liang Bua, uncovered older hominin remains buried in deeper, earlier stratigraphic layers. Here, in the exposed walls of a trench under bright morning sun, was evidence that hominins had been on Flores not for tens of thousands of years, but for hundreds of thousands. The island had been occupied far longer than anyone had imagined. An isolated, pathological late survivor was no longer a plausible explanation. The bones were telling a different story entirely. Peer-reviewed papers accumulated. Citation indexes grew. International and Indonesian researchers began working together again at expanded trenches, sharing tools and pointing at stratigraphy with something approaching mutual respect. The repair of trust was slow, incomplete, and imperfect, but it was real. Homo floresiensis was gradually accepted as a distinct species. The scars of the controversy remained: breached trust between scientists, national debates about the stewardship of ancient heritage, and a media-fed image of paleoanthropology as gladiatorial sport. But the bones had spoken, and eventually, enough people had listened. Today, in a quiet museum gallery, a replica of the tiny skeleton rests on a plinth under a warm spotlight. Conservators arranged it carefully, setting draft placards beside it that describe island dwarfism and the rewriting of human prehistory in Southeast Asia. Visitors file past. Some pause to read, some just look. And sometimes, a child presses close to the glass, peering up at the small, curved skull with wide and wondering eyes, not yet knowing what it cost to get it here, only feeling what it means to stand before something this old and this surprising. The Liang Bua cave still stands on its limestone ridge on Flores, a crack of darkness in the cliff above the terraced paddies and the black volcanic shoreline. The grid stakes are long gone. The cave is quiet again. But what came out of it forced a rewrite of our understanding of who we are and how many different kinds of human once walked this earth. Discovery is messy and political, and deeply, irreducibly human. But when the bones speak, and when we finally set aside everything else and listen, the past can still overturn every assumption we thought was solid. And the Hobbit of Flores, small as she is, continues to prove it.